So I know innovation is something that you're very passionate about. And as you would know, Australia has a new national innovation and science agenda.
Yes.
And there's a lot of talk about it, a lot of money being put into creating business and economic growth through innovation.
Yes.
Where do you see innovation in learning?
Well, I think that the point about innovation is you need a kind of innovation mindset. And the way you innovate in learning is the way you innovate in anything else, is that you've got to be slightly discontented with the present, and maybe you've got to sense a burning platform that is going to engulf you unless you do something about it. And the problem is that learning has been very complacent, or some elements of learning. I don't want to knock learning and development, because I was part of it, but that I do come across people who think that the way it is the way it's going to stay, and I can only say that's not true, and one of us will be proved right, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be me. I work with L&D teams, whole teams, on innovation strategies, and I've never yet run a workshop for an afternoon, so not a large amount of time, where we haven't come away with 3 or 4 really big ideas. So it's a case of just freeing your mind, thinking in an innovative way, using simple techniques and models for shaking out new ideas, and just building that into the bricks, so that becomes the way we do things. We try to make it better every year. We are slightly discontented with everything we do. Even however successful, we can do it better next time, we can do it differently next time, and then you'll get innovation flowing through L&D. And it's an area ripe for innovation, ripe for disruption and transformation, because there's still some very traditional models, like compliance, for example. Compliance is awful, mostly. Boring, tedious, compulsory. And yet there are examples of brilliant, energizing, really well thought through compliance development. And the vast majority of organizations don't do it that way, but they should, because compliance should not just be about ticking boxes and forcing people. It should be about engaging with the reality of non-compliance. And that can be very serious, as we have seen in the banks and others.
I wanted to ask you about the changing nature of learning and development.
Yeah.
And I recall in 2014 at the conference, you said that learning and development will completely change in 5 years' time.
Yes.
And you cited things like advances in technology,
Yes.
neuroscience,
Yes.
Mass customization of
Yes.
learning. So we're now halfway to your
Yes.
5 years.
Yes.
Are you thinking it will change faster, slower? Are there other drivers that are changing the way in which learning and development is operating?
There are other drivers, but I think it is changing fast. Now, I tend to see the leading edge stuff, but some of the examples of completely different models of learning, where big courses have all been abolished and focusing on the moment of need, putting stuff online which traditionally was never thought capable of functioning online, rethinking onboarding, massive re-engineering of onboarding programs, which are usually very expensive, very, very slow, dull, and almost make people regret they ever joined the company in the first place, into really dynamic, exciting onboarding, which is almost like a continuous process throughout your career, always something to learn about the organization. And I've seen the way people are beginning to recognize that, the smartphone in your pocket or your purse is not just any old tool. It is a deeply personal part of you, and to not exploit that attachment in learning seems to me to be almost insane, but not to create something that was designed for a big widescreen TV like the one we're looking at now, and squeezing it onto a phone so it's illegible and awful, but to horses for courses. Like BP, for example, in their leadership program, they use the smartphone app as a way of putting the checklists, so the notes and reminders and the hints and the helps, and also using it so the team in a particular part of the organization could rate something or share their concerns, and the app would then amplify it, analyze it, and present it to the leader. Brilliant use of those technologies, and completely different to anything that's come before. So I think that there's more pressure. It's a more volatile world than it was in 2014, and therefore the changes are coming thick and fast. So I said 5 years. I think that's maybe, I'm right, 2019. That's going to be that's been a big year.
And yet we're still seeing organizations where they've got firewalls and policies against using your own device and things like that. So how do you overcome that in a business?
It's hard, and ultimately, if the business is totally entrenched, then you don't overcome it. You probably leave and go somewhere else. I ask groups of people, how many of you have got a firewall that blocks social media, blocks Facebook, blocks Twitter, blocks LinkedIn, blocks access to Wikipedia, for example? About usually half put their hands up. And I say, and how many people do you think in your organisation use Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Wikipedia? And they go, everybody. and it's just you've just got to emphasise it's futile. If you lock down someone's desktop and their phone, they buy their own smartphone and they bring it into the office, or they bring in their iPad. There's ways around it unless you're in a ridiculously highly secure environment. So you might as well go with the flow, and there's no evidence to say that that makes an organisation less productive. It certainly moves knowledge and it moves information around faster. And why would you not try to share the kinds of insights that come through Facebook and Twitter, rather than just give it away to the outside world and not benefit from it? Because you're not going to stop it. It's just the way the world is at the moment. Go with it. So I think you make the case, the learning case, and if they turn it down, they turn it down.
So businesses and increasingly regulators are focusing on organizational culture and recognizing the links between the culture of an organization and business success.
Yes.
I often hear from learning and development professionals that they're feeling a bit left out of the culture discussion.
Yes.
How can L&D assert itself more and become more part of the discussions around organizational culture?
I think there's a kind of bigger issue, which is that L&D can be shut out of talent, can be shut out of onboarding, shut out of leadership, and shut out of all of the things that you've said as well, and culture and so on. Now, if that is the case, you've got reducto L&D doing, and the worst is L&D equals compliance. I wouldn't want to be in an organisation where that was true. How do you get into the cultural discussion? You have to demonstrate value. You have to demonstrate you understand it, and you have to demonstrate what you can contribute to that discussion. And if you sit back and wait to be counted, you're wasting your time. You've got to be proactive. So I think learning and culture are deeply, deeply linked. And there's masses of research evidence to suggest that. So the companies who do the O&D, organizational development equals culture equals internal comms, they go down that path and shut out L&D and making a big mistake. But it can be a mistake based on misunderstanding, not on willfulness. And if it's based on misunderstanding, then you have to argue what the contribution of learning can be. You're not the full solution, but you're 100% certainly part of the solution. And you shouldn't let that happen. You should be lobbying and moving and manoeuvring to stop that happening.
I think that's where oftentimes L&D professionals have a hard time, because they don't know how to get to the C-suite, how to make the case. And I know you spoke earlier about big data and learning analytics, and I'm just wondering if there's something in that about how L&D professionals can mine that data and use it in a meaningful way to convey their value and what they bring to the organization.
Yes, yes. Let me give you one example of an insurance company. The insurance company used Twitter and Facebook. They lobbied and analysed all of the customer data coming through, and they did phone call questions, text message questions. They got loads of data back, so they were much more intimately involved with customers than they'd ever been in the past. And the L&D person asked to look at that data, say, could I look at that? And what are the conclusions? And they worked with that data, and what it was clear was that there were some significant problems with the sales force that the company had not picked up, that mixed messages were being given, and therefore bad customer experiences were being had. So L&D said, we think we can fix these issues with the sales force, and we should see an uptick in sales and a downtick in complaints. Can we do that? They were given the money by the company. They didn't use their own budget. They put it through. It was an amazing success. Exactly what they proved was right. Now, if they hadn't gone to look at the data and say, can we see the company filtered through the eyes of the customer, rather than that's nothing to do with us, we have to gather our own data. So just be aware of what exists, and most people will help. If you go into NAB in Melbourne, on the ground floor, they've got their social media room, which is a box with massive TV screens, which tracks 24 hours a day, every Facebook comment, every Twitter tweet about NAB, customers, businesses, and they're onto something. They're onto it way before it's become a big trend. Now, they love bringing different parts of the organisation to sit in that room for a day to try to understand the data that's coming in and what you can do about it. And I'm saying to L&D, get in there. You're just as important as marketing or compliance or product sales or whatever it might be. Get in there and see how the bank is experienced by the outside world. And then you react in a learning way, not a marketing way or a compliance way or a sales way, to that exact same data, because it's there for everybody. And most organizations are glad and grateful that L&D wants to leverage that data, and they don't say keep out. And they're surprised often because they think, what, I thought L&D was data light, data-free zone, and it shouldn't be, and it needn't be.
Well, we're talking about social media. I often see the same handful of people on social media in learning and development, and it seems like it hasn't quite reached the breadth of people that could be involved in social media. And as we're talking about content curation and building personal learning networks and things like that, social media seems like a fairly simple and intuitive avenue to build those networks and to share knowledge. Why do you think sometimes L&D professionals are a bit fearful of getting involved in learning and in the social media space?
Because you're exposing yourself. And the first time, if you can remember, the first time you send a tweet, you're sending something out to potentially millions, billions of people. Probably not if it's your first one. But there's a real sense of exposure and vulnerability, and you're putting yourself on the line, and therefore it's easier not to do it and say, oh, I don't tweet, I don't do that kind of thing. And it worries me a lot when organizations seem to embrace that and say it's fine. Whereas, if you're running L&D and you haven't got a list of really great Twitter handles of people in L&D all over the world who will put in front of you ideas, resources, research, they will summarize it for you, they'll do all the work for you. If you're not regularly trawling that, then you're not just missing a trick, you're kind of missing a big chunk of what your professional life should be. So you don't even have to be a particularly great participant to be a recipient. And you can get those lists are in there. You just search Twitter and just attach to a list, and you'll get all of that data. And I found a piece of software called Nuzzle recently. And Nuzzle goes through all of your Twitter followers and all of the things that they've posted, and where it's been retweeted twice or three times, it then packages it for you. So I get maybe 4 or 5 Nuzzle emails, which simply summarizes the popular stuff or the stuff that seems to be important in my network. Now, it's free and it's brilliant. And I miss, obviously Twitter is just this endless flow. You miss 98% of it. But Nuzzle just helps me to capture a little bit more of what I would normally miss, or most of which I would miss, maybe not everything. So there are apps which will help you work with apps. You just need to step into it to realize just how important it is. You could take lots away from me, but please never take my Twitter feed away. Twitter is it's not my life. I think that does sound very sad, but Twitter is my massive network and my connection with the world and my way of keeping in touch. So it's very important to me, and I can't believe that you can be a contemporary L&D leader and be in isolation. How do you find stuff out?
Exactly.
It's really hard.
Now, a lot of businesses are looking to social collaborative learning as a way of curating and collecting knowledge and managing that. But often they're struggling to find a way of proving that it works, or to measuring the actual impact of that. Have you found a way of making something meaningful of that social collaborative learning, and what are easy ways that people could do that?
Yes, 70-20-10 is indisputable. Forget about 70-20-10. But Charles Jennings has recently renamed the 70 component learning as work. So it's just the way we work a little bit more out loud, a little bit more self-consciously. We as leaders or as managers, we encourage a bit of learning in the work process, all of that stuff. It's really valuable. How do you measure the impact? It's difficult, and if you want kind of hard metrics, then it's much more difficult than if you put someone in a room and work with them for 3 hours and then test them at the end of it. But you can do it, and you can do it by asking people what's different around here. If you ask people, how is your job? Is your job easier or more difficult? What has changed in your job? How are you doing things today that you're differently and more effectively than you were doing them yesterday? And you'll get data, and in that will be embedded some of the consequence of social and collaborative learning. But if you try and clean it and make it pure and say it was definitely this was exactly the amount, I would forget that. It's messy data, but it's still data about how an organisation is changing for the better, how knowledge is being moved around, how people are solving problems much faster, and just basically learning continuously. And if you want pure facts and figures, they're more likely to be difficult to obtain. But if you want an indication of the organisation changing, in some way that is more valuable data, I think, more valuable at the end of the day. So you can get it. You just have to talk to people.
So businesses and increasingly regulators are focusing on organizational culture and recognizing the links between the culture of an organization and business success.
Yes.
I often hear from learning and development professionals that they're feeling a bit left out of the culture discussion.
Yes.
How can L&D assert itself more and become more part of the discussions around organizational culture?
I think that there's a kind of bigger issue, which is that L&D can be shut out of talent, can be shut out of onboarding, shut out of leadership, and shut out of all of the things that you've said as well, and culture and so on. Now, if that is the case, you've got reducto L&D doing, and the worst is L&D equals compliance. I wouldn't want to be in an organisation where that was true. How do you get into the cultural discussion? You have to demonstrate value. You have to demonstrate you understand it, and you have to demonstrate what you can contribute to that discussion. And if you sit back and wait to be counted, you're wasting your time. You've got to be proactive. So I think learning and culture are deeply, deeply linked. And there's masses of research evidence to suggest that. So the companies who do the O&D, organizational development equals culture equals internal comms, they go down that path and shut out L&D and making a big mistake. But it can be a mistake based on misunderstanding, not on willfulness. And if it's based on misunderstanding, then you have to argue what the contribution of learning can be. You're not the full solution, but you're 100% certainly part of the solution. And you shouldn't let that happen. You should be lobbying and moving and manoeuvring to stop that happening.
I think that's where oftentimes L&D professionals have a hard time, because they don't know how to get to the C-suite, how to make the case. And I know you spoke earlier about big data and learning analytics, and I'm just wondering if there's something in that about how L&D professionals can mine that data and use it in a meaningful way to convey their value and what they bring to the organization.
Yes, yes. Let me give you one example of an insurance company. The insurance company used Twitter and Facebook. They lobbied and analysed all of the customer data coming through, and they did phone call questions, text message questions. They got loads of data back, so they were much more intimately involved with customers than they'd ever been in the past. And the L&D person asked to look at that data, say, could I look at that? And what are the conclusions? And they worked with that data, and what it was clear was that there were some significant problems with the sales force that the company had not picked up, that mixed messages were being given, and therefore bad customer experiences were being had. So L&D said, we think we can fix these issues with the sales force, and we should see an uptick in sales and a downtick in complaints. Can we do that? They were given the money by the company. They didn't use their own budget. They put it through. It was an amazing success. Exactly what they proved was right. Now, if they hadn't gone to look at the data and say, can we see the company filtered through the eyes of the customer, rather than that's nothing to do with us, we have to gather our own data. So just be aware of what exists, and most people will help. If you go into NAB in Melbourne, on the ground floor, they've got their social media room, which is a box with massive TV screens, which tracks 24 hours a day, every Facebook comment, every Twitter tweet about NAB, customers, businesses, and they're onto something. They're onto it way before it's become a big trend. Now, they love bringing different parts of the organisation to sit in that room for a day to try to understand the data that's coming in and what you can do about it. And I'm saying to L&D, get in there. You're just as important as marketing or compliance or product sales or whatever it might be. Get in there and see how the bank is experienced by the outside world. And then you react in a learning way, not a marketing way or a compliance way or a sales way, to that exact same data, because it's there for everybody. And most organizations are glad and grateful that L&D wants to leverage that data, and they don't say keep out. And they're surprised often because they think, well, I thought L&D was data light, data-free zone, and it shouldn't be, and it needn't be.
So technology is clearly changing,
Yes.
and changing the way we deliver, the way we think about learning.
For sure.
How do you see it impacting learning now and in the years to come?
Maybe I have been saying this for 20 years, and it's been sounding pretty hollow, but I think we're on the cusp. I think there is a massive shift in technology, and how would I summarize that very, very succinctly? The first thing is artificial intelligence. I think the idea of software knowing you and knowing what you need and knowing where your problems are and knowing when you're stuttering or knowing when you're being inefficient is going to be massive, absolutely massive. So you'll have intelligent helpers that will be your learning coaches, if you like. That's going to come. It's already around in more ways than we even care to reflect upon. So AI, I'm a great believer that virtual reality will change things too, that this is the year of VR, and some of the programs that I've seen, even using cheap stuff like Google Cardboard, they're alone the big Oculus Rift type of components, but the fact that you can make people experience the world as if, but in a safe environment, it's almost like a dead ringer for learning and development. And you can think of 1,000 ways in which you can put people in hazardous environments that you can't put them in normally, and bring health and safety alive, make people experience what an office fire or a factory fire is like, and really get the kind of visceral emotional reaction. Help people understand a leadership role when they're dealing with someone who's upset or distressed, where you can feel the emotion in the room and the tension in the room. Put people in difficult, stressful situations and help them cope with it in the real world. All of that stuff, I think, is definitely on its way. And coupled with that is the increasing, I call it appification of the world, not huge big chunks of software that will solve all your problems, but little pieces of software that will all link together. So you'll be able to build your own software universe, your own IT universe, based on things that just connect together. And therefore I worry about the future of big LMSs. I think that the LMS that's cloud-based, that is flexible, that will accept bolt-ons from other pieces of software, has a much better future than something that is not cloud-based, that is totally self-contained, that is mega, and very expensive. So technology is going to change everything.
Of course. With regard to augmented and virtual reality, it was certainly one of the themes at our conference this year. A lot of people were quite interested in it, but most saw it as the domain of the big end of town, the big companies that can throw a lot of money at. Are you seeing smaller providers doing things on a shoestring?
Yes, this is the age of smaller providers. That, you know, you can buy a 3D camera for a few $100s, for example. So I saw a really good piece of virtual reality by Shell. Now, Shell is big end of town, but they spent less than $20,000 on developing a virtual reality mixed-use energy environment aimed at teaching, primarily aimed at schools, but teaching people how different energy technologies can work together, and that you therefore don't say we don't have any oil or any old energy production, but we couple it with new energy production. We build a new energy ecology. And that was incredibly effective because you could walk in this environment, you could explore it in a way that you just can't do from books or lectures or any other format. And as I say, it was very cheap. And schools are getting into it, and schools are always bottom end, you know, they're not the big end of town. So yes, there will be high-powered, expensive applications. I'm sure the US military is spending millions of dollars at this very moment developing stuff. But I think there are enough entry-level software programs, software platforms, that Unity platform, for example, is not high entry point. And there'll be all these clever software companies with, you know, 5 people who will be building great stuff, and they will race ahead. So I watch it. I do not think it's just for the big end of town.
Excellent. Sure. We've talked a bit about the role of learning development professional and how it's evolving. And you regularly talk about the need of L&D to let go of ownership of learning and encourage the learning to be enabled throughout the organization. What steps can individual L&D professionals take to let it go and to move towards a more performance support role or a broader learning ecosystem?
It's hard. It's easy to make light of it and say, oh, just become more like performance support, as if it's going to happen by magic. The brutal way is that if someone takes away your budget and gives it to the business and says you've got to argue to get it back, so that gets you into performance support unbelievably quickly, because you're out there saying, what problems have you, what problems can I solve, what problems can I help you? The key thing is that you're essentially devolving the responsibility for learning. So you're enabling, you're facilitating, you're helping, you're guiding, you're offering expert input, but you're not necessarily in control. And you know, one of my friends took over an L&D lead role, and the first thing he did was he was responsible for a whole bunch of IT and compliance development, which, you know, he knew virtually nothing about any of the subjects. So he's running stuff that he knows nothing about. He just gave it back to them. So, for example, in software development, he said to the software people, you know your development needs much better than I do. Here are some suggestions, like if you subscribe people to Pluralsight, for example. Pluralsight have got massive online resources which you could use, but hey, you just take it over and here's the money to do it, and exactly the same. So he dumped off a whole bunch of stuff that he was really managing very badly, and they took it on and did a much better job. And that cleared the space for him to look at the big strategic needs and work on the big issues that needed to be dealt with, and to have conversations around the organization about learning. And the fact that he had relinquished control and people saw that created the right kind of framework for discussion about, so how could we start working on our own learning? How can you help us deliver this, rather than do it to us, do it for us, do it when we tell you, and all the other kind of bad conversations that you can get with L&D. So it's a journey, and it's hard taking people with you. I once did a session quite recently with a telecoms company who had been told they were moving into, you know, performance support roles. And I'm meeting the L&D team. It was really painful. They all were kind of grieving, and they felt they were being de-skilled, undermined, and undervalued. And it was some really hard work trying to convince them that they can rebuild their careers in a different kind of way. And I said to some of them, look, you really are totally caught up in that role. Go somewhere else where they will respect it If you're clearly not going to make it in that new role, go somewhere else. But for the others, change.
Well, I can just see how hard it would be when so often you're spending all your time trying to convince people that learning is important in your organization and taking responsibility for that, and then to say, well, you know, I'll let it go and be part of a more facilitative role, or be involved in the curation, and so I can see how difficult it would be for some people to actually make that shift.
Yes, it is. I totally agree. But on the other hand, it kind of gets you centre stage. It gets you right into the heart of the business. You see how useful you are. You'll see that what you're doing has an immediate impact on the outputs of the business. All of that stuff is very positive and is a big compensation. And in a way, you know, if you're the CEO, what are you doing? You're just helping people do it themselves. You know, you don't do anything as a CEO. You're just enabling people. So if the CEO has made quite a nice career out of not actually doing anything, I think that L&D can take pride in helping, facilitating, guiding and enabling, and not necessarily controlling, directing, because it's impossible. You can't do it anymore. It's just too complicated.
So we're now talking about individuals, of course, and I know you've said many times that mindsets are holding learning back.
Yes.
So what are some of the mindsets that learning leaders need to develop in order to face the brave new world of learning and development?
Well, it's the really simple thing is to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is a mindset that welcomes change, sees that their own development as part of the bigger picture of development of the organisation, is optimistic about the future, has a vision for a way better future, and not that everything's getting worse and more difficult, and is prepared to speak up and implement that. So I think that is the critical mindset shift. If you've got a fixed mindset, I'm skilled, I know what I'm doing, I want to continue doing it, I don't want to be undermined, I don't want to be told what to do, I don't really want to hand over any of my power and responsibility because that makes me comfortable. It's a deadly position to be in, and it's probably the exit door is beckoning.
Well, oftentimes L&D spend so much time worrying about everyone else and their learning that they often forget to take care of themselves.
That's absolutely
and their
true.
own learning. So what would you recommend in terms of starting points for people to take care of their own learning needs?
Just, I suppose, three absolutely fundamental things. The first is reflection, that build in reflection in your week. And there's no way that anyone can't find 20 minutes a week, maybe in 2 lots of 10 minutes, to just quietly think about what they're doing. And if they could do that every day, even better. Just to be conscious workers and to begin to work out loud and reflect on their practice and make it better. The second thing is just to tune in with the industry, find out what's going on in other organisations. And in this online world, there's no excuse for isolating yourself. You know, read a few blogs, get onto Twitter, find out what's happening, find some key people, find some key companies that you admire or seem to be moving in a direction you'd like to move, and you can begin a dialogue or at least keep in touch with those organisations. And just keep that dialogue amongst your team. Keep everyone talking and discussing. You know, I remember working with Southwest Airlines and their learning and development team. They had themes every quarter, and they'd say, right, who wants to find out about this? And someone would say, oh, I'll find out. Who wants to find out about that? Oh, I'll do that. So each person took on a little research responsibility, and they went away and they went and found out and they talked to people, and they came back with not just this is what's going on, but this is what's going on, this is whether, this is how we could use it, and I think we should, or I'm not sure, or I don't really think we should, with a firm recommendation. And that created some really interesting dialogue, and just keeping everyone alive and talking and aware of that there is a world out there was incredibly valuable for the whole output of the team, not just on the development stuff. But so many teams never do that. They rely on individuals to do it off their own bat, or they kind of punish people for, why are you wasting your time playing around with that stupid app? You know, you should be doing your work. It's just such a negative connotation, and people like learning. We are learning beings, And learning should like learning. But sometimes learning doesn't like learning. And that's when I get really scared.
A lot of people end up in learning and development through a very circuitous route.
They do, yeah.
They're often really good at doing something, and then they get asked to train other people on how to do it, and they find themselves by accident in a learning role. What are the steps that people who are new to the profession can take to catch up with what's happening and get ahead of the curve?
Yeah, well, just to give you an example about that, when I started teaching at the University of Pennsylvania on the CLO doctoral program, and the first cohort, we asked them, I think there were only 16 people coming through to do their doctorates, we asked them to describe their learning journey that got them to where they were, which is senior people in learning, you know, executive vice president and above. And there was no possible coherent pattern at all. It was really interesting. So the idea that you want to be a learning leader, this are the 3 steps you take. It doesn't really work like that, and it's almost getting more diverse. So you know, if you're in learning, I think it's very important that you don't just be in learning. If you work for a company, be obsessed with that company, find out what they do, how they do it, learn their language, be part of it, and just be an active self-developer. Ultimately, we need everybody to self-develop. We need them to be pleased and proud to maintain their skills and standards. I always say to people, how many MOOCs have you taken? And even though MOOCs are kind of everywhere, the vast majority of people have looked at them, maybe enrolled for them, maybe even did one thing, but not actually done a MOOC.
That's me, totally.
Is it right? Well, you know, take a MOOC. You know, there's such interesting stuff now, and they're getting shorter. So they're 20 hours or something like that. We can find 20 hours over 20 weeks. You can do that. So just get into that kind of learning, new learning experience, new learning ideas and content. Just be curious, spark your own curiosity, and take the plunge. And learning people are slightly embarrassed about exposing their own learning. Supposing I can't do it. Supposing it's too hard. Supposing I fail. I'm a learning person who's failed at learning. And you've just got to swallow it and do it and step out there. And engage. You know, what book did you last read? And you meet people who haven't read books for years. Read a book. Try it. It's amazing. You know, you learn how to do a lot of stuff through books. Start engaging people on specific topics. Now, if you say, look, let's have a lunchtime once a month focusing on a different issue in L&D, even if people haven't researched it deeply, there will be enough people who've suddenly ears pricked up, try and find out a little bit, to have a pretty rewarding discussion. But if you don't have those lunches, you don't have the discussion, you don't have the learning, and you don't have the insights.
Well, we're talking about books. Do you have a couple of books that you would recommend as must-reads for L&D professionals?
Yes. I think that the emotional intelligence guy, Daniel Goldman, Daniel Goldman has written a book about focus. It's called Focus, and it's really interesting. And it's basically saying, in this world where we're taught to millisecond flick from thing to thing, that he's saying the successful people are the ones who learn to focus. And I really love Focus. I think it's a very simple, straightforward book. And you know, I would read anything by Daniel Pink. You know, that all of his books are very, very interesting, and you know, about motivation, about selling, about the way organisations work. So just put Daniel Pink in, and they're pretty easy reads. But if you want a hard book, but an unbelievably brilliant book, it's Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. Yes. Kahneman is brilliant. I don't think he makes many allowances for his reader. He just says it like it is. But it's a big fat book, but the logic is brilliant. It's brilliant, and it changed the way I thought about thinking. So Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman, an unbelievable book. So they're just 3 off the top of my head, which I think could be really insightful and valuable and worth the effort. And start reading. And people say, oh, I haven't got time for reading. I always say to them, commit for 2 weeks to reading 1 page a day. 1 page a day. Can you commit to reading 1 page of a book a day? Yeah, I can. Do it. Not every other day. Every day, commit to 1 page for 2 weeks. 14 days on the trot, 14 pages. Will you do that? I've never met anyone who hasn't used that. That's the lead. That gets them going.